right here. Um, and yeah, I'm happy to be here with you folks today and running through this. If some of you folks were here from the first session, talking about Vai with Kalani, it wasn't planned this way, but it's a good segue, and it's very much related. And we're going to get into, okay, we've heard about the waters. How do we do it from a societal planning standpoint, and particularly land use planning as a system? But before that, we're going to do an overview, like Kalani did, but a little bit different about where the waters are coming from. So anyway, here we go. YML features planning and continuity with water. My name is Kamuela Plunkett. I am a climate adaptation land use planner with the USGS. It's actually a fellowship, so I'm not a USGS employee. It's more like a contract researcher. And my form of climate adaptation is looking at, again, the land use planning as a system. And how do we start to adapt that system so the system starts to put in measures that either restores or perpetuates our water system. But it's coming from an indigenous lens of lands. I got to mention my sponsor. So the branch of the USGS I work for is PICASC, for Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center. We're not just located in Hawaii. The island nation states down in the south that have compacts or agreements with the United States are also within the realm of our research. Okay, so we're going to do this session in 3 parts. The first part is going to look from an overview of land perspective, and I'm going to talk about Val and Po'ai. And Val, I'll get into it, the nuance of it a little bit later, but basically it's how the kupuna saw vegetation patterns and how they related to them. So again, it's actually a societal land use plan. We're going to talk a little bit about why the kupuna divided the land. And I present this before, and some Kanaka are like, we didn't separate lands. The truth is, our kupuna didn't separate the lands. They told each other how to relate to one another on the lands. The kupuna wasn't about separating ecosystems. So I know there's some Kanaka was coming out strong, like, land divisions, that's Western. No. The Kanawai is actually built into the land divisions, and we're gonna, hopefully I can show that. Part 2 of the session is showing an example of how we can reconstruct the old vegetation patterns using ethnohistoric studies. And then part 3 is gonna be specific to looking at Waimea from a land use planning standpoint with some of those indigenous knowledges embedded. So basically presenting you a model for community, Aina-based land use planning. Okay, quick overview. The first part is from my current project with USGS, trying to reconstruct Val. And there's a lot of content. I'm just going to talk. I advise you guys to read some of it, but don't get caught up on it. Project Val is an interdisciplinary project. I am working in the ethnohistoric language and mapping. I'm not a monoleo, but I do analyze what words mean and how that shows up in the historic records to give us clues about what the land use prescriptions or guidances were. But these are the other working groups that are trying to help bridge this gap between the modern land use system and perspectives of vegetation on the landscape with the indigenous perspective. This is just an overview of the project. I'm working on the systems analysis. If we're going to change the system, and I know this is also controversial with the Kanaka, but if we're going to say we don't like the current land use system because it's not embedding environment and relationship in there, and we're saying our way is better, we kind of got to describe it as a system so we can tell people what the conversions can be. Sometimes we come out as Kanaka, I understand that, and we tell everybody what's wrong. We don't tell them what the conversion is. So we do a little bit extra work. But that's basically what all of this is. Okay. And leading it to this, how do we frame a comparison between the current system and the kupuna system? That's basically what this is talking about. I want you to look at so this is actually social ecology. Burks and Folke are like experts in it. This is their framework, and I'm adapting it for the analysis here in Hawaii. I think the thing to look in their analysis, which again I'm using, is number 3, those combination of property rights, arrangements, institutions, and knowledge systems which accomplish the above the first 2 points successfully. You know, I think some of the questions that was being raised in Kalani's, the previous one, about rights, we got to realize that from a planning standpoint, we got to look at the same map, we got to address the same resources, even though we get individual property rights. And again, that's another thing that Project VOW is trying to do. Okay, why did the kupuna divide the land? So again, you know, I work for a climate adaptation agency. So reading through David Malo's work, Hawaiian Antiquities, look at chapter 7. Chapter 7 is going to talk about the different types of land divisions. But you know what he starts off with? He starts off with telling us it was an adaptation to a situation. There's a situation, and we need to adapt. So this is directly from him. In the very ancient days, the lands were not divided. An island was left entire without being cut up into subdivisions, such as Mokuaina, Kalana, Okana, Ahupua'a, or Iliaina. But when the island became crowded with people, it was divided, and the land was portioned out equitably and a name given to each part in order to identify it. Climate adaptation or social adaptation, believe it or not, they're not separate. So when we think about the moku, the district, when we think about the ahupua'a, that was our kupuna adapting their society to match the challenge of their time. Guess what? It's still useful today. Going on, he says, in the old days, the lands were divided up according to what was proper for the chiefs, the lesser chiefs, the prominent people, and the people in general to have. Each family clearly understood what was their land and their birthplace, their aina pa'a and their onehanao. And the chiefs knew what lands they had given to this and that person and the obligations that went with each portion of land. So again, think society-wise. Okay, we're going separate the lands, not to break up the ecosystems, but to organize us. So we know, moko moko with each other, right? The other thing that they did, though, so we're going to adapt, but we're also going to give kuleana. Which relationship is, so when you see pilina, that just means relationship and stewardship. Okay, how did we come up with our current land portionings? What methodology did they use to create these lines on the map? Have you ever asked yourself? Have you ever asked yourself, why is over here ag, and why is over here residential? Why is there conservation? And have you ever thought about what dynamics in politics, economics, and imperialism was going on at the time when those lines were being drawn? What I'm saying is those lines weren't drawn to the environment. I don't have time to go into Kanawai, but anyway, okay, so look at the lines on the map, look at your zoning map, so on and so forth. So when we talk about systemic change to re-embed Ike Kupuna, so that where we live, where we build, where actually the system is already telling you how to work with the Aina. That's where we got to get back to.
Or if it works or doesn't.
Yeah. Why do we need this? Okay, I mentioned it a little bit. The historical context of our current land use system. So the state land use law came in 1961, but the land studies that were being conducted to get there started in 1937, the legislation, but the study actually came out in 1939. So what is interesting when I talk about motivations of the time, this is their own quote from that report. And the legislation, Act 207 of the 1937 leg said, we want studies and then we want maps. So that was going to inform the land use. But in this, they're saying, here, the price system, meaning here in Hawaii, the price system and laissez-faire control commerce, industry, finance, credit, and capitalism commands the field of planning. All that government can do in this sphere is to legislate against abuses. I tell you, if the government doesn't have the right land use maps, they can't do that. And the first part is pretty not that good anyway. So when people complain, when there's these conflicts about land use permitting, it's stemming from way before our generation. The other thing is, so David Callies writes about the 1961 land use law, and he says, we got to realize that that was actually written to favor the Big Five. Not going to go into who the Big Five is. If you know, you know. If you don't, Google the Big Five. But he's an economics professor and an attorney, and he says, you got to realize that law was for them. And then a report in the newspaper, I was glad to stumble upon this, but come to find out that Matson was started and most of the shareholders are from the Big Five. So during that time when we're using less of land to support ourselves locally, and we're like, don't worry about it, because we get our goods from here now. This is how you start to understand we're getting disconnected from the land. We're being told it's okay, but in the midst of that, we're also losing our ecosystems. This is what's embedded in our land use. So how do we start to remedy this systemic issue? But mind you, I'm not calling anybody evil. What I'm saying is we don't realize how we got here. And we got to go back and we got to look and we got to say, so in adaptation, you have to identify the issue first. And a lot of government plans today, well, let's write ledge so we can write a new plan. But to me, people aren't really diagnosing the systemic stuff right. Okay, what does this barge mentality look like as it spreads out through the rest of government? So the CZM part of the state and county permitting is for the special management areas down at the coast. It's paid for by Fed funds, which probably got cut drastically in this administration. But even the Feds say, these islands are small enough that from the bottom, from the coast all the way up, is a CZM zone. But what does the state do? The state says, No, right here is the SMA zone. That's a fragmentation of the ecosystem. And then the forest reserves. When we hear about watersheds, a lot of people talk about the tops of mountains. And we created these reserves. This is where conservation happens. But that's another fragmentation of the landscape. And they're saying, we're going to regulate environment through the general plans. Well, you guys heard a little bit of what Waimea is going through. That's how good a job that is doing. So what are our communities holding their ground for when we see these conflicts over land uses? I think whether you're Kanaka or just Kama'aina for generations, or you more recently, but you love Hawaii, you want to see Hawaii do well. I believe we're all fighting for a resilient and healthy Hawaii. So how did the kupuna embed within their land use, their land administration, this system where the whole society is conscious of their resources? So here I take a linguistic approach, and trophic ecology is the study of how organisms cycle energy through the entire system, right? When I look at what our current system does, and like I told you, it's like, let the market supply what you need. But when when you go with that rationale, and it's exacerbated on islands of isolation. But when you do that, and you're not including yourself in the ecology. So how did the Hawaiians include themselves? So trophic ecology, the study of the structure of feeding relationships among organisms in an ecosystem. Trophic ecology investigates how various organisms at different feeding levels interact with the ecosystem. So if we look at the social structure, starting from the chiefs down to the commoners, there's this word called ai. And ai is food, but ai can also mean consumption. So the district level, you have the ali'i ai moku. The ali'i that eats or consumes the district. Then under them, each ahupua'a within the district has an ali'i ai ahupua'a. And then you have the maka ai nana. That's the commoner that's working in the aina. Aina itself is about food, but also consumption. At every level, there's a monitoring of what is being consumed. And when you are separated from that ecology, you use land differently. So what comparative land systems. This is how our kupuna embedded themselves in the land use system from the perspective of I. And how did that, okay, more language to talk about how the kupuna embedded this knowledge in society relating to land. So I talked about I. Another thing to know is that, so there was a yearly tax, and the tax collectors would go on a circuit around the island, and they would stop at districts in Ahupua'a. So this is a case study relevant to South Kohala, right? And the tax was the produce of the land, the products of the land, and they would come to the ahu at the edge of a district or Ahupua'a, and all the goods. And what I'm telling you is actually up there, so you can just read it too. But they would put all the goods over there, and then the tax collector would say when enough is enough. So Ahu'alono, how this plays out here is Ahu'alono is down at Waikoloa, between North Kona and South Kohala. You can go there. It's still there. They reconstructed it. It looks great. So that view from the collection center, looking up Mauka, that's why I have that picture. The picture below is a vegetation reconstruction done by Holly McIndowney. She used historic records, Mahele records, to create that map. So it has vegetation and it has land use on it. So imagine going back where you're down at the bottom and you're looking up, and the tax collector and maybe the chief of the Moku is with the local manager. And he's saying, hey, I know in that part of the forest you get Eevee birds, or you get this type of bird. How come no more of the feathers on over here? Yeah, I noticed in that section, I can see. So this is Val. This is Po'ai, vegetation patterning. And on the Ahu, so what I'm saying is the Kupuna had a mental map of their lands as an inventory study to what? Observe the eye, to observe the consumption. Are we consuming right? And when you're not eating from your land, you're using your land for other things. And that's how you get. Okay, working concepts of districts as watershed districts. There's more strategy that our kupuna did. Lorenzo Lyons was a missionary. He came here. His son, Curtis J. Lyons, became a governmental surveyor in the 1800s and early 1900s. I don't know if he was still employed. And so they actually had a book talking about how they're going about the surveys. And there's an appendix called Land Matters. And he's going to describe Ahupua'a. And this one he says, not Ahu, on this island specific, because it's big and we have some interior land bases, and it's related to our Mauna as well. He says, the common Ahupua'a doesn't go all the way to the tip. It doesn't go all the way to the ridge. It goes to the verge of the forest. And then he says, but there are these other Ahupua'a that on the inner lands, they open wide and they cap other Ahupua'a. What's that? That's your forested watershed. So, Ka'ohe. So this image here is those Ahupua'a that are major parts of the district boundary that expand laterally. And if you look at topography where they're shed, and they're meeting up with Ahupua'a below. This is a land use strategy based on watershed. That's why I call it Moku. Nowadays I call it watershed districting. What was key is not just the topography though. It's what the vegetation pattern is. And you're monitoring it. You're monitoring your eye. You're monitoring how you're using your land. Oh, this is the part. Then there are larger Ahupua'a, which are wider in the open country. So Project Val, as a pilot project, is looking at West Hawaii, looking at these distinct functioning type of Ahupua'a and trying to recreate the vegetative patterns from a Val Po'ai perspective. Lorenzo Lyons talks about the commons. So Lorenzo Lyons lived in Waimea, and he says, the common land to which Lyon, this was actually from Moffat and Fitzpatrick, commenting on a letter from Lyons. It says, the common land to which Lyon referred was situated above most of the Ahupua'a. There you go. It's like, this is not a joke. This is a real system. Multiple lines are confirming that this is a land use system. Situated above the Ahupua'a and encompass forest and barren mountain land. We have tall peaks in which vegetation stops. So this is not the same for every island. It says, although the land may have technically belonged within a given Ahupua'a, it was apparently available to all the people living within that district. If you look at the shape of Waikoloa, there's a skinny sliver that comes in through Waimea town and goes up into the Pu'u. Why is it called Waikoloa Stream? Because actually, Waikoloa Stream for portions runs along the Waikoloa Ahupua'a. When you think about Waikoloa down there, super dry, right? But that's the other thing about land divisions, is that there's always an equity in resources. You have the, so why am I mentioning all of this? Lawrence Alliance's church is down in Church Row, where Waikoloa, I can't imagine. And so don't quote me on this, but he's seeing somebody, he's like, hey, where are you from? Where are you going? Oh, I'm from Waikoloa. We need some timber. They're passing right up. Yeah. Okay. Oh, back to this. The other thing is, on our mountains, we have some sections that doesn't have vegetation. Mind you, the watershed definition from the USGS says a watershed is the catchment area that funnels water from where all the waters from certain areas go to a common point. So it's not just that forested part at the top. It's the whole thing coming down to the bottom. So there's parts of the watershed that is not thick forest. It doesn't mean it's not doing a water capturing function. But most likely, if you get good, healthy veg, native veg, then it's functioning as that water catchment. You guys were talking about how do we get more water in the streams? How do we get more water into the aquifers? So if we represent these vegetative patterns, we'll be, as communities, helping the system to come alive again. Okay. So in that same chapter, David Marlowe, about land divisions, talks about, so you have these land divisions that run Mauka to Makai, but then these vegetative delineations, they're not boundaries. They're just descriptions of the different types of patterning that can happen from Mauka to Makai. So he begins with the Kua, and the Kuahivi and the Kualono, those on Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. Hualalai has vegetation almost to the top. There's some areas, maybe the very tip might not have vegetation. Kohala doesn't have a Kua section because it's vegged all the way to the top. Okay, so, and the way it reads is, he mentions Kuahivi, Kualono. Luapele is the craters of the, so any place where there's a crater, from volcanic crater, there's a Luapele. And then as he's writing, he says, then in the Kuahea is where the small trees grow. So it mentions these guys don't have vegetation, but in the Kuahea is where small trees grow. Ecologists call a transition in ecosystem ecotone. So that's a signal. We're going from no veg to a small veg. And then he talks about the vau. So vau nahele, or also known as vau eva, vau maukele, vau akua, in which again smaller trees grow. So we just went from no veg to small shrubs, maukele, in which the monarchs live, big veg, dense veg, maukele, and vau akua. People think vau akua is way at the top. No. Vau akua, where the smaller trees grow. But the vau akua is also known as, right after vau akua is vau kanaka. The other thing about the vau maukele and vau akua is that it says no living and no human interaction. Oh, so there's a conservation land use guidance in that already. And then it says, at the vau kanaka, here grows the ama'u fern, and men cultivated the land. And then there's other things. So again, watershed is all the way down. And there's different descriptions. So what I'm saying is, we need to tap back into this knowledge. we need to create new land use maps. And even if it doesn't pass ledge, communities can start to act on it already. And I believe someday, we will have a blending of the systems. So really fast, in general, there are three general land zones: the Kua, the Val, and what I'm just calling below Ma'u, because that's how he says, below. So here grows the Ma'u fern. He's making a delineation. This is an ecotone, and then there's different land descriptions below that, where men's activity can occur. So the hypothesis is there's three general land terms. Those individual land terms are po'ai. Po'ai is described as something that encompasses or encircles something. So based on the temperature, the amount of moisture, the substrate, you can imagine that these po'ai are going to shift in size along the mauna. That's the other thing. It's mauna-centric. Why do we care about our mountains? Because the whole system was based on the health of the health of the water is tied to the health of the mountain and the veg that is on it. Okay, just another example. This is just an estimation of where the Kua is on Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea. And like I said, Kohala, it just starts in Val. Okay, this is not just Hawaiian knowledge. It took about 4,000 to 5,000 years once the Austronesians left Southeast Asia. They went on a long trek down through the Malay, Philippines. Some jutted out to where Micronesia is. Some continued on down Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, and they sat there for about 800 years, according to archaeologists, before they jutted out. And it was over a 4,000-year process. What I'm saying is, we descend from people who studied how societies need to live on island ecosystems, islands of isolation, where your transport, we may still have interaction with other archipelagos, but we don't have it to the degree where we can live off of their supply. So island management and Hawaii is towards the end of that migration. There's over 4,000 years of knowledge formulated in just the basics, but the foundational aspects that I just shared with you guys. Why am I showing this? All of these different island groups have the word Vau in them. And the commonality between all of those terms is uncultivated and not for habitation. And you look at some of these islands, the veg they got is small. You think we're going to use up all the land because there's hardly any land. They had conservation because they knew if we don't take care of that, we're not going to remain here. Why am I emphasizing this? So communities at land use meetings for permits, there's a big fights. And I used to work for the planning department because I wanted to learn the system. I am really about, hey, let's look at the systems. I don't need to demonize anybody. Let's look at the systems and figure out where it's missing. But I review a lot of permits. And when it comes to changing the zone or changing the land cover, and that's usually through a change of zone permit or a special permit, which allows you to do something different than what is being guided. There's this question on the application. What's the alternative to your proposal? And they always say, there is none. This is the best and highest use. That's because nobody's talking about what was originally there and what the function of it was. And that development It's not that it can't happen, it needs to be guided. So this enables communities to say, hey, we have a map and it is scientifically vetted. There is an alternative. We can restore watershed. We can restore stream bed. Okay, that was part one. How much time we got?
Till 12:15
Oh my God.
for you, and then we have questions after that.
Okay, I got till 12:15. Okay, we're gonna move fast. So that was Val. That was Val. That was District Ahupua'a lands. How the Kupuna embedded themselves in the ecology, the trophic system, and it's in the language. It's in the structure. They had their monitoring system. Everybody, not DLNR. Nah, no worry. DLNR get the forest reserve. Everybody had a role in monitoring the eye, the consumption. Okay, so case study from the ethnohistoric language and mapping. And we're gonna run through this real fast.
You have until 12:25 for your presentation.
Okay.
and any questions.
Okay, and again, just read. I'm just gonna talk. So I overlay maps, I analyze topography, boundary commission records, place names, other things like that. And I compile them in GIS. So this is a case study for a whole now. And the way this came about is just looking at a lot of research and following a thread. This is telling you that Waimea is not just town. It's a kalana, and there's many other lands. This one describes from Kilohana, a place on the rim of Waipio, goes all the way to Pu'uka'ali'ali, down to Pu'ukapele in the saddle, goes up, comes up O'uli. It describes everything. And all of that is lands of Waimea. So when government describes Waimea, it's fractured, and the CDP, which is the federal designation, doesn't have land controls, but it's just how they categorize us by census. But again, when government and developers don't perceive the land right, this is how we're planning, right? When in actually, if you look at the Mahele and boundary commissions, all of that is Waimea. Everything in South Kohala except for Kauai 1 and 2. When we start to look at current delineations of land, you're fragmenting 5 ahupua'a, and none of them are watershed-based. Okay, so first layer, understand the traditional boundaries. Second layer is your view planes, because the view planes tell the community who you are. So the trails, that's a historic trail overlay. Actually, all the pu'u, many of the pu'u are on the moku boundary. And so, again, when Kupuna were walking Mauka to Makai, they knew what lands they were in, they knew who they had to talk to, they knew where the resources were. This is another shot of the view plane. Here it is in reality. Again, mental map of veg and the inventory of the aina. From the ahuolono, looking up, you can see all the eye. And you can know your part in that eye cycle. So when Pomai was asking, what water are you? Like, I am the water that takes care of this part of the aina. We're all not going to work for DLNR, but we all can get better at understanding our part. Okay, more view plane. Vegetation reconstruction, I give you guys a glimpse of this from Holly McIndowney. She talks about, you can find my thesis online, Waimea's Heritage Landscape, Google it, you download it for free. Because I got to get to something really important. So each one of those bands are explained by her. All the archaeology we see at the coast is because of, we took care of what's up there, we get water down here. For fishing and other villages. There's Pu'ukapu, forested. There's a big chunk, everything in the light beige color on down used to be forested. That's not there any longer. So again, we're taking that out, right, of our system. The places that doesn't have surface water, the divisions still had anchoring pools and fish ponds, and that's accounted for. Distribution of resources, equity. Traditional ag was super important. This is from archaeological maps that I overlaid. These are 4 field systems. One up you can still see above Anna Ranch. One at the dump, the transfer station, that is actually was Lo'i. And then this big one, Field Complex 3. And then Lani Mau Mau served Field Complex 4. You can still see some remnants of these. Okay, so total traditional ag in our area up here. Oh, Ulula'au was on Holly McIndolling's study. She accounts that in the forest, there were groves. So Waimea was Ulula'au. So when you account those 3 complexes along with Ulula'au, there was over 10,000 of traditional regenerative ag in Waimea. 4,200 acres of that was irrigated. Okay, so this is actually at Ulula'au Park. This is actually, I took GPS points, aligned the maps. The outtake from Waikoloa Stream came right over here, fed that 3,000 acre Field Complex 3. So how do we negotiate change with all of that? How do we convert Aina research to land use guidelines? That's really what I wanted to get to. Here's a metric. So for each one of those maps, I gave them a general title. This metric across here is that framework combining Western, but also indigenous knowledge for describing features on the landscape and their function. So this one is traditional boundaries. What does the boundary of Waimea Kalana describe? It's perception. For the traditional agriculture layer, same thing. How does Field Complex 1 and 2 relate to each one of those categories of significance? When you fill out these metrics, remember that each one of those descriptions are spatially based. They're not pie in the sky ideas. You ever sat in a community planning meeting and people telling their ideas? There's no baseline. And then you can create a statement of significance. And everything you say in there is coming from the land. From that, you can create land use guidelines. So here's an example. I used to work with a lot of policy. So your beginning starts with the introduction to what you're going to introduce. And then your prescriptions for the Lalamilo viewshed, trail, and riparian corridor or commons. So I read you the lines. Here's Pu'ukapu as your watershed commons, Lalamilo as your viewshed, trail, and riparian commons, and then the coastal. And then this recommendation is not just coming out of my opinion. This is a model. And people don't have to follow it. I think the main thing I wanted to tell people is, how do we stop fighting in a room? How do we get our opinions rooted in Aina? And this is going to come out. So I'm not saying do minds, but I want communities to start doing this for themselves. So my recommendations, this is an overlay of Walter E. Wall's map out by Aloha, but actually a parcel adjacent across the street from it. 1 minute, I made it. So, but I am going to make recommendations. I did that project in 2018. The first part, what I shared with you, is what I'm working on now. But I'm just going to start telling people what I think should happen.
Yeah.
We should acquire land near Aloha for a living heritage center. The nurseries and the agroforestry there will actually go out to community members to help them plant just 5 more ohia, 5 more koa on their land. But it's a heritage center that actually will be reconstructing some of the traditional ag. So when people come to learn more about Waimea, they're going to know about not the past. I mean, yes, the past, but also how we're perpetuating it today. Lani Mau Mau doesn't flow anymore. And that it really breaks my heart. But some of these old Alwai can be converted to trails. And again, as visitors come, they can walk the trail guided. How they do on their phones now. They pass a certain point, they get a narrative, they get a different, an image. The staff would be that community agent working to continually update their land use map. And essentially, they would also create a local tribunal that would be involved in vetting land use issues or proposals. There's a policy thing between land use law and water law that I did, but we're not going to do it today. Thank you, guys. Question? Yeah.
I want to say thank you. That was amazing. I would take a whole course in that semester, a year, anytime. And I want to thank you so much for that. And I guess that my concern, and I only grasp some of this, is there seems to be, like, you have this wealth of knowledge. Now you say you're beginning to speak. And then there's this time issue where things have to be speeded up because we're already in a drought. Who knows where that's going to go with climate change. I have the first graduate degree ever in social ecology, which I think it's amazing to actually see social ecology up there. That's amazing. That was from 1980.
You're a trailblazer.
Huh?
You're a trailblazer.
Yeah, and a troublemaker in a good way. So I'd love to speak with you further, but my question to you is, as I'm sure other people have, and we had this morning, is how can we speed this up to like a warp speed to where it actually makes a difference? It's not just more talking and planning, because the people are so sick of that, and
Yeah.
this is what we want. Like the opinions, I'm not interested in my opinion or anybody's, but I'm extremely interested
Thank you for
in that.
sharing your insight and your question. I do want to see land use reform based on science and knowledge, ike kupuna. That's going to move slow. So we got to do things concurrently. That's why I want to produce this map so that, and have it be scientifically vetted and culturally vetted. When we can substantiate that, communities can start to move. Then nonprofits can start talking to each other and say, oh, we're working from the same map. Land acquisitions is becoming an important form of land preservation. You guys might have heard the Affordable Housing Land Trust. There's county PONC funds, there's state legacy land funds. What if these land acquisition parties actually work from the same map? What if they just started to connect the dots? You know, trying to change land use regulation because it's been embedded and the system has been stacked against, it's been serving a certain segment of our population. I don't perceive it changing really soon. But what if we just start to act already because we're working from the same map?
Yeah.
What if we're making pacts amongst each other? The other thing I got to tell you is this is an intergenerational map. It's an intergenerational plan. We live in drought, and not a lot of my scientific colleagues will say, well, you know, the moisture is different. We can't restore that. The rain follows the forest. Maybe we cannot restore all the vol one time. But if we push that boundary further down the gradient, that creates a moisture buffer in front of it that wasn't there. This is an intergenerational plan. And let's not get discouraged by small. If we can extend 200 yards across one ahupua'a, the next generation can extend another one. Okay.
Really like your talk. Thank you so much. And apologies if these questions, I mean, there's a lot of information and it impact fast. I think it would be really helpful in that map of your capping of to overlay the conservation district boundary, because I think there's a lot of synergy there, particularly in like Kohala and Konanao. I worked in both those places sustaining conservation all life. I think they're already captured in kind of that conservation land use zone, and I
Yeah.
think that was intentional based on the resources that were there. And really, kind of, that's the reason those resources remain, right? They weren't converted to sugar or development or anything like that. It's more just like a note. It's hard to visualize it. I was trying to think in my head, like, okay, where was the conservation use boundaries based on this western system? But I think there's a lot of overlap. But in the sense of town and Waimea, I totally get coming down with the ag system. And like I said, I worked in conservation my whole life. The issue becomes the funding.
Yeah.
And one of the big projects to bring the forest down the Kauai corridor, which is Pukewaika area and coming down the coast. I mean, you can dump millions of dollars in trees,
Yeah.
but you can't replace the forest. And so the big component of preservation has been protecting what's there. And when there's funding available, extending it down is just not enough. So I mean, I fully support the idea, but if we have the idea and the money, then it's kind of,
Yeah.
you know. So I mean, I guess it's not really a question. It's just how.
I agree with you.
Yeah. I mean,
I'll give you an example. So I've been talking to HPA had a planning meeting a couple years ago, and because they had a lease from a portion of what Parker Ranch was leasing to somebody else or something. They let HPA have it. It's above by Pu'ulailai. So my friend Willie Quayle works over there, and I was like, oh man. And again, yeah, that you're right. Like that boundary, I looked at it. It's not that different, that veg line. But what was the veg before that and the field system? You know, that can be restored. But again, I was like, so here's Anna Ranch. And I talked to Steve for many years, Steve Best of Anna Ranch. Now he's actually got funding. So it did take time. But he has a plan. He took out the cattle. He's going to reforest. I made the same recommendation to HPA. They didn't move on it. And I think there may be one or two other. So again, this is the thing about when we're working from the same map. How can we combine efforts? I just got a grant for a nursery, but not for planting. I got hands. So yeah, no, money is an issue, but I think again, when we're working from the same map, we can combine our funds and our efforts. The other thing too is we got to learn how do we build in fire breaks while we're reforesting. And I would love to see the model that informs, because we don't want to spend so much money on reforesting just to see it go up in flames. So we got to build in the fire breaks. Somebody else?
So how can we get a copy of this so we can look at it again? That's a lot of knowledge. Yeah.
So again, the current one is not written up. I'm still working on it, but all the stuff on Waimea, you can find in my thesis report online. It's called Waimea's Heritage Landscape. You just Google it. It take you to the UH library, and there's a link.
What about this actual recording?
Oh, yeah. We have to talk to the organizers.
Talk to Auntie Diane afterwards.
I think they're going to send out an email to all the participants with links to the different recording of the different sessions.
Really quick. So Bill from the Waimea Preservation Association put in an application for Ala Ohia, which is called Minukeole Park today. And there's a lot of different people concerned about Waimea going into the future. So what can we do. We have to talk more. We have to get together. I'm trying to work on these maps as fast as I can. I only got 2 more years in my fellowship, but go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry if this is like kind of a naive question. So I was in the Mo'olelo session before, and one of the speakers was talking about when he went to the mainland, they have like indigenous areas for indigenous people, where like we have the reservations and things like that. Is there any, like, I'm not saying reservations, but is there any way that we can, like, protect land now? Like, don't buy this land. This is sacred land. Like, I feel like I don't see that as often.
The
what I
most
mean?
effective mechanism has been land trusts buying lands for those preservation purposes, and then even like buying it from developers. And there's been some developers that has had a hard goal in a parcel, and then sometimes they so okay, short answer. I think land acquisitions for trust specific purposes is the most effective in this day and age. Yeah. Oh, I'll come back to you.
Is Parker Ranch selling up a lot of land right now?
Not to put you on the spot. Are you? You did.
I'm not gonna speak on my
Okay.
professional
Yeah.
path,
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
but
You don't have to.
I do work for the ranch, but I'm not here to advocate for anything one way or the other. But it involves a lot of what's being talked about.
I don't. So I'll just throw something back at you. I think what I've heard, and I'm not too sure, but what I've heard is that a lot of the real estate trajectory that Parker Ranch has taken is to fund the trusts. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that trajectory, if we wanted to adjust that, they also have to realize the significance of Waimea and start to balance. And I'll tell you something, a comparative analysis from Kamehameha schools. The land agent there would tell a story about how at first, when he does his history, is that Kamehameha schools found themselves with a lot of bills and land tax. And they started selling land. At some point in time, they said, we're gonna have diminishing returns. And that's when they shifted to the lease model, where they're retaining their lands and they're making so much for the trust. Not speaking to you directly, I think if Parker would have adopted that earlier, maybe it would be different. But I think, in my opinion, trustees and the other decision makers maybe need to have a refresher. To me, the cowboys retained the knowledge of the land. Because they were generations. And even if it wasn't on the landscape anymore, they heard it from their kupuna. They knew what was where. But that was all in their minds. The thing is, how do we let those decision makers know? And then, what is a new model?
Can I just fill in on that? That's one thing I can speak about. So you're right, the lands of Parker are all held in a trust for the beneficiaries. One of them is funding this event, right? The Hoiking
Yeah.
Foundation. So the lands are specifically tied to that trust. It's not, there's no other entities involved. It's the land and the beneficiary. The other thing I can speak about is the ranch is under new management as of recent, right? New CEO in place, Mike Atane. And we are going through this internal process to realign values on the ranch, specifically starting from the cowboys and Paniolo whole and building up. Happy to be a part of that. We're at the very early stages of that. We were just interviewing some old Kamaina families yesterday, and that should be coming out for public viewing in the next 6 months.
Wow.
Mike Akane was also a trustee of Kona Schools, and I think that's where a lot of the vision is coming from.
Okay.
And Zachary wouldn't say it, but Zachary's job in Parker Ranch is a sign of that shift in perspective by the work in reforestation, land management, looking at where it was and where you want it to be. So your responsibility, your kuleana within Parker Ranch is an example of the changes that Parker Ranch have made. And I want to acknowledge that you're living it, and we're lucky that you're there.
You can do it, Zach.
No, I just want to acknowledge it. You're a humble guy. You don't want to say it, but I'll say it for you.
Eileen?
So I just have a question. I do a lot of planting with students around in West Hawaii, native plant restoration. So I'd love to have a map that shows what plants should go where, so we can be more accurate. And also considering climate change or drought, and that, what's going to do the best in which places would be helpful. Throw that out there.
I'm still working on that, but the map I can give you is an overlay of Holly McIndowney's work, and she has some prescriptions. And then, but as far as how to replant in conjunction with climate change, and again, that water catchment, personal water catchment system is very important. To just have it on your property, to do that. But yeah, I can't say what the impacts would be. I'm more concerned about baselines and how far we got away with it. Then other people can see, okay, at this point in time, we can't restore to that. But at least we have something to shoot for. It also helps society to we don't have a mechanism to be reflective as a society. And not in a way that blames the generation before, but say they had a certain rationale. But obviously some of that didn't work because we're in a bind right now. So how do we reflect instead of point fingers? How do we as a society say, that was there then, this is the situation in now, and it's not about going back. I tell you, being in preservation, people always tell me, why, you go backwards? I said, wow, preservation is all about the future. It's not about the past. It is not about the past at all. It's all about the future.
So so many things come up again, and one is the pu'us, reforesting the pu'us, just stopping the cattle on, say, Pu'uhoku'ula. Just stop it and get all the grazing animals out. But a thought just occurred to me, because you have so much knowledge and it's hard to take in, especially it's super glary right in here. But in New York City, somebody did this video. It was a total reconstruction of how spectacular Manhattan Island was in the days of the indigenous people, because it was an extraordinarily and abundant, diverse island. And that would be really beautiful to have a filmmaker create something and a storyline. Of course, I'm watching Chiefs of War now, so it's that to go back in time to see, because I always have that thought. I mean, it's uncanny how much I wish I could see wherever I am, and I hope Omalu the way it was, or I wish I could see. But now somebody could do that with filmmaker and with AI and all of it. Yeah, that's.
Well, I do believe in the power of when, for better or worse, okay, media and production is powerful. And yeah, so we can use that for good. That's not my expertise, but if somebody wants to make a project, then I'd love to. I don't mind sharing. It's that juxtaposition, right? It's the juxtaposition. And if media can do that, yeah, I'd love to help. Go ahead, Bill.
Is part of the vision of restoring forests and waterways, does it include the fish ponds, or restoring fish ponds that were on the island? Because there were hundreds of acres of fish ponds on the island that are basically just not used anymore for anything other than bird nests. And that's a big space that could be used for raising more food,
Yeah.
making the island less dependent on bringing things things in.
Yeah. No, definitely. And we do have some groups. The Hui local group, you know them. The Hui local group is working on, I mean, it's a network that they network to Malama fish ponds across the Pai'aina, but we have our own network for West Hawaii. And yeah, I mean, to me, yes. Even so, maybe not directly, but right, fish ponds, the abundance of fish ponds operates on the combination of saltwater, but with the input of fresh water. So yeah, the work definitely is trying to support that. In my research, 1960, there's a luau being held in Waimea Town for one of the cowboys, and the paper says the cowboys went down to go harvest fish from Kalahui Poa'a. They laid a net overnight, put up 400 pounds. The thing is, we don't have to eat 400 pounds at one time, right? So if you had fresh fish coming up for market, if it was managed again, but again, fresh water is essential. So
Yeah, definitely fresh water is essential. There's a lot that's like that just bubbles up though, close to the coast, at least in Kona.
yeah.
Are we done?
Thank you guys. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you folks. Yeah. Thank you.